Have you ever been on a project where nobody really knows when it'll actually be done? It's a common problem, right? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Scrum metrics that solve that exact issue, turning all that project uncertainty into predictable, measurable progress. Let's dive in.
This is the big question, isn't it? When you're building something new, it's messy. The path is never a straight line. So how in the world do you measure your progress and, maybe more importantly, predict when you'll actually finish? Turns out Scrum has some surprisingly simple but really powerful answers for this.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute core metric, velocity. Think of it as the engine that drives the team. Then we'll look at the burndown chart, which is all about tracking daily progress. After that, we'll zoom out with the burn-up chart for that big picture long-term forecasting. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see how these numbers lead to way better conversations about deadlines and money.
All right, first up, velocity. You can think of this as the speedometer for your team. It's not about how fast they feel like they're going. No, it's a real hard measurement of how much work they can actually get done in a set period of time.
But to measure speed, you need a unit of measurement, right? In Scrum, that's the story point. Now, this is super important. This has nothing to do with hours or days. It's a single number that captures everything: the effort, the complexity, the risk of a task. The team decides together, is this a simple 1 or a really tricky 5?
So once you have story points, velocity becomes incredibly simple. It's just the total number of points a team actually finishes in one sprint. That's it. It's not a guess, it's not a wish, it's a hard number based on what the team has already proven it can deliver.
And calculating it is about as easy as it gets. Sprint ends, you look at all the work that is 100% done, and you add up the points. And here's the golden rule, the one thing you have to remember: no partial credit. I mean it. If a task is 99% done, it counts as 0. This really forces the team to focus on finishing work, not just starting a bunch of things.
So why do we care so much about this one little number? Well, because it's kind of like a crystal ball for the next sprint. It lets a team look at a pile of work and realistically say, yeah, we can do this much. And because it's based on what really happened, it automatically bakes in all the real-world chaos. The meetings, the interruptions, the unexpected bugs. It's an honest look at a team's true capacity.
Okay, so velocity helps us plan the sprint. Awesome. But how does the team make sure they stay on track day by day? That's where our next tool comes in, the burndown chart. Just think of it as the team's daily GPS.
Let's break this chart down. It's super simple. Along the bottom, you've got time. So day 1, day 2, etc. And on the side, you've got the amount of work left to do, all measured in those story points. The goal is pretty straightforward. Get that line down to 0 by the last day.
Now, on this chart, you're always going to see two lines. First, there's the ideal line. It's a perfectly straight, predictable path from the starting point total all the way down to 0. But then, there's the actual line, and that one is reality. It zigs and zags as the team updates their progress every single day, showing the true, sometimes messy journey.
And this is why it's so powerful. If the team's actual line is floating above the ideal line, that's an instant visual warning. Uh-oh, we're falling behind. It immediately sparks a conversation about what's slowing them down. On the flip side, if they're tracking below the line, they know they're ahead of the game. And hey, they might even be able to pull in more work. It's this constant visual feedback loop.
So we've planned the sprint with velocity, we've tracked it daily with the burndown. Now it's time to zoom all the way out. How do we forecast the entire project? For that, we use the burn-up chart, which is all about seeing the big picture.
Now, with the burn-up, we're kind of flipping the script a little. The bottom axis isn't days anymore, it's whole sprints. Sprint 1, Sprint 2, and so on. And the vertical axis isn't work remaining, it's work completed. We're tracking the total value we've delivered. So unlike the burndown, this line only ever goes up. To make a good prediction, you need data, right? And what you'll see is that a team's velocity, it's going to bounce around at first. Totally normal. But as you can see here, after a few sprints, usually 3 or 4, it starts to settle into a pretty predictable range. And that stability, that's the key to everything.
Okay, now for the really cool part. We can take that historical data and project it into the future. We can draw a line for the best case scenario based on their fastest sprint, a worst case scenario based on their slowest, and the most likely path right down the middle using their average. This creates what we call a cone of probability, showing a realistic window of where the project is going to end up.
And look, this is probably the most important part of this whole thing. These charts and numbers, they aren't just for the team to look at. Their real power is in completely changing the conversation you have with stakeholders. They let you have honest, data-backed discussions about scope, deadlines, and budget.
With these forecasts, a product owner can finally walk into a meeting and confidently answer the two huge questions they always get. First, there's the date-driven question. We have a hard deadline. What can we get by that? And then there's the scope-driven one. We absolutely need this set of features. When is it going to be done?
So let's take that first one. A stakeholder wants their minimum viable product, which the team has sized at about 155 story points. Instead of just picking a date out of thin air, you can point to the burn-up chart and say, look, based on our team's actual performance, we will likely deliver that sometime between Sprint 7 and Sprint 9. The key is that it's an honest range, not some fragile promise you can't keep.
And for that date-driven question, if a stakeholder says, what can we launch for the big conference in Sprint 7? You can look at your chart and give them a clear, data-backed answer. Okay, by then, we're on track to deliver somewhere between 108 and 158 points worth of features. That instantly changes the conversation to prioritizing what's most important.
And of course, you know where this is all headed. It all comes down to money. The cost of a sprint, with salaries, overhead, all that stuff, it's usually a pretty stable fixed number. So for this example, let's just say each sprint costs the business $25,000.
And once you know that cost per sprint, the burn-up chart basically becomes a budgeting tool. To figure out the cost of that 155-point MVP, the math is, it's pretty straightforward. You can now give a realistic budget range, somewhere between $175,000 and $225,000. No more guesswork.
Now, it's really important to be clear about this. These are predictions, not prophecies. It's not magic. They are only as good as the data you have right now. But the best part is, with every single sprint the team completes, you get more data. And the more data you get, the sharper and more reliable your forecasts become over time.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. Now that you've seen how this works, how could using tools like these change the way you plan and talk about your next project? How could you move away from guesswork and towards real data-driven predictions? Thanks for joining me.